Hello folks, this is Steve Mann. I'll be your presenter for the Food Not Lawn's Kansas City Lawn Eradication 101 webinar, How to Turn Your Lawn into a Garden. Food Not Lawn started in Kansas City in 2007 at the Coming Home to Eat conference. There was a breakout session and the group decided to use Heather Florey's book Food Not Lawns, which had been published in 2006, as a handbook to help teach people how to turn their yards into gardens. We started a Food Not Lawns experiment station in the spring of 2008 to test out some of the techniques that we'll be showing you in this webinar. Here you see we're using solarization to kill off the lawn for the new garden. We tested other ideas there like season extension. We used cover crops, compost teas, organic agriculture. Here's Sarah, one of the founders, who lived on site spreading manure over that recently solarized patch. And here's the garden a couple years later, very productive, really good soil there along Line Creek. We had cover crops, just a wonderful place to grow food. So why Food Not Lawns? Well, lawns are an ecological disaster, and there's so many reasons, but we'll go over a few. There's 40 million acres or more of lawns in the U.S., largest irrigated crop. Water use is over 49 billion gallons a week. Fertilizers use is 3 million tons a year. Deathicides, herbicides, and pesticides are sprayed on the lawns to the tune of $2.2 billion a year. This is 10 times more than agriculture, corn and soybeans. So people have reacted by growing food in their front yards, in their backyards, the side, community gardens, getting rid of lawn. You can go full-blown foodscape. Every plant produces food or flowers, food for somebody, something, butterflies. Or you can balance a little bit of lawn with some food production, natives, flowers. You can use vegetables in the landscape. Here's Pal Gardens, great place to get inspiration on edible landscaping. Or you could have a food forest like this where you mix shrubs, flowers, berries, and vegetables. So people ask, can I grow food in my front yard? Well, in Kansas City, you can. In 2010, a group of growers in Kansas City worked with the zoning department to come up with a urban agriculture ordinance, and this has been used by other cities as a template. We're sad to report that in some places like Sugar Creek over by Independence, they've even made it more restrictive. There was controversy there in 2016, and they changed it so that there's a 30-foot setback till you can grow vegetables. Pretty much shuts it down. You can call your city zoning department and ask, and if you belong to a homeowners association or you have a covenant that prohibits growing vegetables in your front yard, you can work with that group to get it changed. I think nowadays more people are going to want to grow food close at hand. Talk to your neighbors. Most citations come from complaints. The zoning officials don't drive around looking for problems. So all those chemicals and fertilizers that are put on lawns leach into the groundwater and then ultimately into our streams and rivers and lakes, and they flow down the Mississippi and they cause a hypoxia dead zone there. There's an algae bloom, and then the oxygen is depleted in the summer when it's warm and the fish can't live there. It's cut into the livelihood of fishermen, shrimpers in the Gulf. Every major river has this hypoxia zone in the summer. So what would a sustainable food production system look like? Well, these are my ideas. It would use ecosystems management principles. This is a way of managing ecosystems devised by ecologists in the Yellowstone National Park, because the issues they were coming up with went beyond the park boundaries. The bears and bison and wolves, they don't stay inside the park. They move around. So we would have distributed production in your yard, close at hand where you need it. We'd use polycultures and perennials, maybe a food forest. Low impact, no-till, organic, regenerative, give back more than we take. We've destroyed so much, especially in urban ecosystems. We have to give back. So it all starts with the soil. Soil is a living organism, a food web, and it's vital for it to be healthy to grow food. We've already destroyed over 50% of the soil in the U.S. Took thousands and thousands of years for that soil to build up. Earthworms are a major way that soil is built. Darwin calculated that earthworms deposited 10 to 20 tons of castings per acre on his farm in England. So worms are vital in the soil food web. It's all based on solar input. Energy from the sun is captured by green plants, and they turn it into sugars and carbohydrates and proteins and lipids. And when they die, their leaves and stems break down, and the soil food web digests those minerals and makes them available. Every level in the food web has a predator above it, and ultimately we are at the top of the soil food web. We take out energy from the food web and rarely put it back in. One of the most important components of that food web is the mycorrhizal fungi. Scientists have recently discovered properties of these fungi who actually penetrate a root hair and form a symbiotic relationship with the cells in the root. The plant gives the fungi sugars, and it brings back minerals, water, to the plant. This greatly extends the reach of the plant as far as getting minerals and water. On the left, you see how limited the resources are to the plant because there's no fungal network. The fungus also can capture nematodes that are going to attack a plant, dissolve the nematode, and feed it back to the plant. This is what the connection between the fungi and the cells in the root hair looks like. There's a vast network underground of these fungi connecting plants together in a forest or in a prairie where it's not disturbed. The plants actually communicate with each other. They're connected by the fungal network and can share resources between plants. Here's the fruiting body of a mycorrhizal fungi, a truffle, French truffle. Here's another type, morel mushrooms. So you can even buy a oak tree that's been inoculated with truffle spores and grow your own. Organic matter, OM, is one of the key components of soil. It's made up of the plant biomass, plant tissues, fungi, bacteria, animals that have fallen to the ground. And organic matter is composed of cellulose, chitin, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and salts. Proteins have a lot of nitrogen in it, and all of these have carbon. Soil is not a uniform powder. There's different sized pores which are filled with water when the soil isn't dried out. It also have minerals in there, organic matter, and all kinds of soil food web life. Composting is a way that we can give back to the soil in the soil food web to make our soil healthier and have more organic matter. A good compost pile is at least 3 feet square and high, no larger than 5. That allows it to get hot and kill off weed seeds and break down fast. There's many ways to build a compost bin. When you fill it, you have to use this method to get the best results. You create layers. Brown is your carbon material. We want ultimately a 30-to-1 ratio between the brown and the green, the carbon and the nitrogen. So this is kind of a formula for getting close to 30-to-1 ratio. It has to be properly watered. Water each layer as you build it. Turn the pile weekly. Bury your kitchen waste in the center. Keep it moist but not saturated. If it gets really rainy for a number of days, cover it with a tarp. You should have finished compost in 4 to 6 months. If you don't do these things, it could take years for it to actually break down, and chances are raccoons and possums will come in and feed on your kitchen waste. So you might want to try vermicomposting either under your sink or in your basement, your garage, or even outdoors if you protect it. I've found that raccoons love to get in a worm bin. They eat worms. So you got to protect your vermicomposting bin just like a compost bin if you do it outdoors. There's plenty of YouTube videos that tell you how to do this, so we're not going to go into that. We are going to talk a little bit about compost teas and inoculants. Here you see a sweet potato leaf on the left was sprayed with a indigenous microbial inoculant, and it was very robust. The whole row we sprayed was all the leaves were like this, and then the part we didn't spray, the leaves were, not as healthy. So this spray really worked. Cover crops. This is our ecological cornerstone for sustainable organic agriculture, even in a garden. So here are the benefits of cover crops. They increase the organic matter content of the soil. There's more earthworms and beneficial microorganisms. It activates the soil food web. It increases soil plant available nitrogen. It stabilizes the soil and prevents erosion. It keeps the surface of the soil cooler. It brings minerals to the surface for other crops to use. It provides habitat, nectar, and pollen for beneficial insects. Improves water quality, allows root and air penetration into the soil, increases the soil's moisture holding capacity, and the higher the organic matter content, the more soil's moisture holding capacity. Chokes out weeds, breaks up subsoil, reduces the population of pest organisms, adds some color. So here's a cover crop chart that you can get from the USDA ARS service, and it is an interactive PDF where you click on these boxes and then it will show you information about that particular cover crop. We have warm season, cool season crops. We have broadleaf grasses, cool season grasses, warm season grasses. Bet you didn't know that spinach could be used as a cover crop. All these things. So let's look at one. Squash. Here's what you get when you click on the box for squash. It gives you lots of information about it. We see that it does form the mycorrhizal association. Here's spinach. It's a cool season broadleaf, annual, and it does not form our vascular mycorrhizal associations. Very peculiar. A lot of the brassicas don't either, but it's still very useful. Cattle love it. Cereal rye, that's a cool season. You plant this in the fall, August through October. This is one of the main winter cover crops in our area. Radishes. That long root on the daikon, forage radish, breaks up compacted soil, quickly breaks down in the winter and lets air and water penetrate. White clover, great cover crop, great for paths, nitrogen fixer. So here's the link to find this cover crop chart. So you can use cover crops as a living mulch. Here's a great one. I use subterranean clover. We used this at the experiment station, tried it out. So here's part of the field in subterranean clover. This is about May. Dug out some of the clover and planted my tomatoes and peppers. And then subterranean clover dies in June and July when it gets hot, and it leaves this mulch mat on the surface of the soil. And it gets its name because the roots penetrate the soil and deposit the seed just like a peanut. So winter cover crops. Here's a good mix for our region. Cereal rye, hairy vetch, daikon radish. You could even add more. White clover is a great cover crop, like we've said. It can tolerate traffic. You want to keep it back from your vegetables so that it doesn't compete. Buckwheat's a great one. There's no weeds in there. It goes to flower 8 to 10 weeks, depending on the temperature. And the flowers just are full of beneficial insects, bees, lingus bugs, hoverflies that lay their eggs in caterpillars on your cabbage. So we want these beneficial insects, and buckwheat's a great way to feed them. It will self-seed, so if you don't want to keep having buckwheat, you need to terminate it before it goes to seed. Daikon radishes die when the temperature falls below about 25 for 2 or 3 days. Here you see them dying back, and there's winter rye growing around them, cereal rye. Here's a mix of daikons, rye, and vetch. Great cover crop mix for the fall. And winter kill cover crops. This is a concept that will save you a lot of work, because one thing about the winter rye is it's going to live through the winter, and it could grow 5 foot tall by June when it will die, and you could harvest the grain. So if you want to grow vegetables in that spot in the spring, you have to terminate the cover crop. You have to cut it down and remove it. You can use it for mulch, but you still have to manage it. So one way to do that is have the benefits of cover crops, not do so much work, is to use a winter kill. So all of these cover crops will die when it gets really cold, but they'll still cover the field and stop winter weeds from growing. They will also have salvaged a lot of nitrogen and saved it so it doesn't go in the river. Here's a mix for these species together. It's always best to have a cocktail of cover crops. It's more beneficial to the soil food web diversity. You could do some math to figure out how much per 100 square feet, let's say, of each of these. Here are some sources for cover crop seeds. In Kansas City, Planter Seed has a lot of these, but not all of them. So we've talked a little bit about no-till, and tilling destroys the soil, but not tilling protects and builds the soil, and it's less work. It conserves water. We have minimal soil disruption, protects soil surface, avoids soil compaction. You're not running equipment over and over. Use drip irrigation. It will save water, and all this reduces carbon emissions. So here's a simple test. Go to this YouTube site and watch Ray Acheletta demonstrate the difference between soil that has been tilled and cultivated and soil that hasn't. We want the soil on the right. So here we are, lawn eradication methods. This is how to get rid of your lawn without chemicals. We could dig it up. It's very effective and cheap, but it's a lot of labor and you're exposing weed seeds. Sod cutters, less work, but it's going to cost you some money. And you have to be able to haul the equipment from the rental. Solarization is very effective, also kills soil pathogens and weed seeds, but you have to have polyfilm to do it. It's available at Lowe's or Home Depot or places like that. Paint supply, it's an environmental issue because you have to somehow dispose of the plastic. It kills the beneficial soil microorganisms at the same time, so you're going to need compost tea after the solarization and some compost. Sheet mulching is very effective if you do it correctly. It quickly builds soil and adds organic matter to the soil surface. We're mimicking the floor of a forest with sheet mulching. The sheet part of it is a weed barrier and a solar barrier. Whatever's under there is starved for light, quickly dies. It's labor intensive somewhat. You need the raw materials, newspapers, cardboard is good, and you can't let it dry out or it'll come up from the ground and blow away, or won't be effective, and it's hard to get it re-wetted once it's totally dried. So let's talk about solarization as a lawn eradication strategy. So here's a typical kind of lawn. It's got all kinds of stuff growing there, but this is mostly looks like Bermuda grass or some kind of warm season grass. So you want to cut it no more than 3 inches high, rake it to get sticks out and have a flat surface. And so here's some more things about tilling. It oxidizes soil organic matter. It may cause a boom for a while, but you're using up your soil organic matter. It also favors non-native species, Johnson grass, fescue, decreases soil carbon sequestration potential. Tilling destroys that soil pore structure that we want, decreases water holding capacity, causing compaction, exposes the soil seed bank to the germination zone, increases your weed pressure, and it increases erosion. So, like I say, clear the site. If it's really dry, you probably want to water it before you put the plastic down. The plastic will capture the solar energy and heat up as high as 180, 200 degrees on a really hot day. So it kills all the vegetation, the seeds, and pathogens in the soil. The goal is to maintain daily soil temperatures above 110 for 6 weeks. So that's why you have to do it during the hot part of the year. So here's kind of a timeline I used for a project to plant natives, but this will work for a garden too. You could start right now. This is the end of March. So the 1st of April is probably a good time to start if it's for a garden. And then you can stop in June and plant hot weather crops like sweet potatoes. If you're planting natives, you would stop in August. Then you would inoculate your soil and then plant your cover crops. And then if it was natives, you could snow seed in the winter. Do precision snow seeding where you actually lay out a bed. If you want a lot of coneflowers in a bed or some other flower, you would just drop the seeds where you want them to grow. So here's the site of our test. We used both clear and black plastic. The clear is already fogged up from moisture underneath it. See how we covered the edges with wood chips so we get a good seal. We got the wood chips free from an arborist friend. You can use Chip Drop to see if you can get free chips if that's available in your location. So here, after we took the plastic up, we burned off the lawn. So we raked that stuff up, that thatch. And here we've already put about an inch of nature-wise compost, and then we're going to spray it with this microbial inoculant, a tea. There's the recipe. The other tea that we used for the sweet potatoes, we used this pretty much same recipe, but instead of aged manure, we used some soil from a site that had never been farmed or grown on. So here I'm spraying the inoculant onto the nature-wise compost, and then we seeded it, just broadcast the seed. There's this mix we used had spring oats, daikons, and buckwheat. They sprouted a couple weeks later, and here's what it looked like towards the end of October. The buckwheat was already going to flower, but it died a couple days later when it got cold, frosted. Look at that daikon radish, deep. It goes down probably a couple feet, breaking that soil up. And so by the end of November, we'd had a couple frosts. Everything died. Look how it's covered the soil, stopping winter weeds from growing. So let's talk about sheet mulching. Like I said earlier, we have a weed and light barrier in the sheeting that we want to cover it with a material, a mulch, the commercial type mulch that you can get from the city brush drop-off in Kansas City, Missouri. Here's sheet mulching in action. See how we're overlapping the sheets, a quarter to a third to a half. We want to use a whole section of the newspaper, so it's probably about 4-6 pages. We keep them moist so it doesn't blow away, because it seems like it always gets windy when we do sheet mulching. You want to do a good job with your sheet mulching so you don't have to pull weeds. Those plants under there are going to try to find light, so it's going to grow till it finds a crack and come up into the sun. So do a good job, and it'll be a better carefree garden. Here's some of the things we can use for the mulch. Peat moss is good, but it's not a natural resource we have around here. And if it dries out, it's hard to get it wet again. So it's definitely not good to have 3 inches of peat moss. Pine needles are a great long-lasting weed suppressor. Sawdust. Don't use painted or treated wood. Wood chips are good. Straw is one of the best, but it does contain wheat seeds, and they will grow, and you'll have to deal with those and pull them out. So you might want to condition your straw ahead of time. Leave it out in the rain for a couple weeks so that all the wheat seeds sprout, and then they die when they dry out. Stone's good, but it's probably best for paths and edges. Compost is good if it's made right and is free of weed seeds. Bark and chips, weed-free, long-lasting. Hay has weed seeds in it, so that's not a best choice. Grass clippings work, but they get hot. They could harm your vegetables. Holes and shells are good. Leaves are probably one of the best resource we have, because you can pick them up in your neighbor's front yard in the fall and use them in your garden. If you grind them up, they don't blow around so much, and they break down quicker. Leaves are a great resource for sheet mulching. So here's a truckload of the mulch you get at the Kansas City, Missouri brush drop-off. It's free to Kansas City, Missouri residents on Saturdays. They even load it for you. Other cities have it available. Olathe, and I think I've heard that Blue Springs does. So call your city to see if it's available. 1 cubic yard will cover 100 square feet, 3 inches thick. 3 inches is your minimum that you want. So before we put the sheet mulch down, we want to fertilize the soil surface. That way the bacteria that are breaking down the mulch won't immobilize the nitrogen in the soil, so your plants don't get it. So here I'm going to show you a sheet mulch job. Start on May 4th. I've already spread the nitrogen on the ground. I'm starting to lay out the sheet mulch. You can see the overlapping of the newspapers. See how I'm keeping a clear edge, so when I overlap, I don't have to brush away the mulch. And There it is. It took me a couple hours to do this. I created keyholes that gives you a lot more edge to work. Here's kind of a diagram of a keyhole design. Mandela. So here we are, June 3rd. I planted squash around the edge, zucchini. We got pole beans growing up the center, and I'm building trellises for cucumbers. June 15th, squash is just going crazy. It loves it. And here we are, July 17th, crazy garden. Everything loved. And just think, there's probably yellowing grass under there. It's, the lawn is not dead all the way, and we have this garden on top of it. Very powerful, just in a couple months. So you can do this now and have a great garden this year. You don't have to wait. We had 3 houses in a row in Westport. A couple years ago, we sheet mulched them all. You can see the sweet potatoes starting to cascade over the edge. So how do you plant in the sheet mulch? Well, here we made a planting area just by sifting the mulch and putting the stick part out on the pathways and putting the fines, the leaf mold into the row. We planted transplants right in there, but you could plant seeds in there too. So I showed you earlier, subterranean clover, just dig a hole in it, dig it out of the way. I use a grubbing hoe that's sharp to cut off the buckwheat to plant in it. Just kind of roughing up the first couple inches of soil. And you can put soil where you want to grow seeds in the mulch, or you can use, all new imported soil to create your beds. There's a keyhole, drip irrigation. Here's a mixture, here's a polyculture of vegetables. We've got different kinds of kale, there's turnips in there, there's beets, there's lettuces, there's onions down a ways you can't see. Oh, and look, there's some of that wheat that sprouted from the straw. So here's a beetle bank. This is a area you leave kind of wild between fields, and predatory insects overwinter in there. Then they go out into the field in the spring and take care of the insect pests. We want to have little ecological compensation areas in our yards, maybe along the back fence, and all the neighbors do this, and we will enhance the diversity and bring back, some of the songbirds that eat, squash bugs. Give them a place to live. More bees, more butterflies. We need water to grow. We want to store it on site. We want to know how it flows across our site so we can plant our garden. Do we have low spots that we can't grow because it'll be muddy? And where does your roof runoff go? Can you create a rain garden with your roof drainage? You can even have vegetables in a rain garden. It doesn't have to all be native. But we want to catch, store, direct, delay, aerate, absorb, infiltrate, slow, and disperse water across our site. The best place to store the water is in the soil, not in a plastic tub. But if you need to, or you feel like you want to, here's how much water you get from a 1-inch rain. A little over half a gallon per square foot. Here's a 250 to 300 gallon tote you can use. Here's the idea of a swale and a berm, a mound and a trench. It allows the water to soak in and stay in the soil. This is the ideal way of having water that you need for your garden, right in the soil. Here's a berm to capture the water that flows up against it. Apple tree berm, I call it. Here are some swales and berms at the Cultivate Kansas City Food Forest, right when it was being established. Here's a swale system in Lawrence. Here's some I'm working on in my garden years ago. Here's one in a project, fruit trees, food forest. Here's a site that terraces were the best designed for this site because it's steep. So we've got rid of our lawn. What are we going to grow instead? Well, I recommend backyard orchard culture, a high density fruit tree system. So you can have little trees that you prune just like you do any landscape shrub or tree. Keep them low so you can pick it all. We don't want more apples than we can use, because this is what gives apples in the city a bad name. They're wasted. Nobody needs 20 bushels of apples all at once. So we can use backyard orchard culture. It's kind of developed by David Wilson Nursery. Check them out. That's actually 3 trees together right there, and you prune it to the height you want in the summer, not in the dormant season. It used to be that there was 50 trees in the orchard per acre. Now there's 1,500 to 2,000, and they have them on trellises, and they prune them this way. So we want just a pretty little tree in our landscape, maybe just enough to pick. And if we do the backyard orchard culture, we can have an early, a mid, and a late tree all together, and we can have a long season of harvest. You can even put 4 trees together, or you can put them in a row on a trellis. Here's the design of the apple tree berm. Here's a design for a 3-wire trellis system for your high-density trees. This is how you can train your trees. Give you lots of side branches. This is what it looks like in action. This is great for a U-pick apple orchard. It's easy for people to get to them. You can do decorative topiaries and espaliers with your fruit trees. And here's some plants for your edible landscape. Here's some cherries. If you use it bush cherry, then you won't have so much bird pressure, because, if a robin's sitting on the stem there, he can eat a lot of cherries. But if it's a bush, it doesn't have this kind of stem structure, they don't have any place to sit, so they don't bother them so much. Apples and pears are great. And use disease-resistant varieties so you don't have to spray them, and there's less pressure with poisons. You can have pecans, chestnuts, and hazelnuts in your landscape. Pawpaws, figs, plums, and cherries again. Blackberries, currants, blueberries, gooseberries, jostaberries. Gumi, it's a Chinese fruit. There's hardly any pests for gumi. Chinese mountain cherry, the cherry shrub. Grapes, kiwi. These are kiwi in Merriam, Kansas at the Food Forest. You can grow them here. Strawberries all over the place. Different kinds of strawberries. Yep. Wild strawberries can take a lot of shade. Ground covers in our gardens. Here's some of them. Could have beautiful strawberry O'Connor clover. American cranberry, lingonberry, and beautiful vegetables. Look at those peppers there. Those are landscape peppers. Unlike other peppers, they stick up instead of hang down, so you can see them, and there's all different colors available. And sweet potatoes, don't forget sweet potatoes in the landscape. They're a great plant. Very productive. And you don't plant them till the end of May and June. All kinds of alliums. Asparagus. Asparagus cleans water, and they like damp spots, so they're good in the rain garden. Rhubarb, violets, and insectary plants. This is a native that brings in parasitic wasps. Butterfly milkweed, biscuit root, yarrow, and tansy. Here's a mixture in my garden. Rocky Mountain bee plant, that's a native. Some people call it cleome, coxcomb, dill, zinnias. So let's talk about shade, and we're going to use the stacking functions either in time or in space, to kind of change things up. So time stacking would be when we grow winter hardy vegetables under our trees that are shady spots, and they will grow in the fall and live through the winter. And once the trees lose their leaves in the fall, they're pretty much full sun. So you'll get production over the winter, not a lot, but then first thing in the spring before the trees leaf out, you're going to get lots of spinach and lettuce. And once these vegetables are growing, even if the trees leaf out before you harvest, they will still produce because they're already growing. You can also stack in space where you have multiple leaf surfaces, different levels, so that every cubic inch of your garden is capturing sunlight and producing food. So grow stuff under the trees and around the trees, different heights. Sun and shade, these are questions we get in Kansas City urban areas. You have houses and you have lots of trees and buildings. So most plants, that we eat need full sun. There's a saying, if it's green and leafy, it can take shade. If it's fruit or root, it needs full sun. So observe the pattern across your growing site over the seasons. Full sun is more than 6 hours, and that's usually between 9 and 3. And partial sun is 4 to 6 hours. Full shade is less than 4. And there's a few things that will grow, but you're not going to get a lot of production. On the south and west sides of buildings, it can get very hot, so plant things that can take it. And the best fertilizer for your garden is your shadow. Well, thank you, folks. Hope you have a great gardening season. If you need any help, give me a call.